programa ay rated PG. Patnubay at gabay ng magulang ay kailangan sa mga batang manonood.
Good evening. You are watching the Chairman's Report, brought to you by IBC 13 and the Commission on Filipinos Overseas. That is the agency under the Office of the President mandated to connect the Filipino diaspora with the Philippines. I am 𝐂𝐡𝐚𝐢𝐫𝐬𝐿, Chairman of the CFO and your program host. Our discussion tonight will revolve around the contributions of Filipinos abroad to national development, primarily through remittances. We will also talk about financial literacy, mainly from the viewpoint of overseas Filipinos, but this topic will surely resonate with our local audience as well. To tackle tonight's topic, we have invited Lito Villanueva, the Executive Vice President and Chief Innovation and Inclusion Officer of RCBC. It is one of the largest universal banks in the Philippines, with total consolidated resources worth 1.2 trillion pesos. Actually, Mr. Villanueva wears many hats, as evidenced by his other titles. Besides his RCBC role, he is also the founding chairman of the FinTech Alliance.ph, co-founder of the Asia FinTech Alliance, and founding chairman of the Alliance of Digital Finance and FinTech Associations. He is also a permanent council member of the ASEAN FinTech Forum, a trustee of the Philippine Blockchain Council, and advisory board member of the ASEAN Innovation Business Platform. Through the initiative of Mr. Villanueva, RCBC and the CFO signed an agreement to collaborate, among other things, on financial education for overseas Filipinos. A long-running CFO program is PesoSense, which encourages Filipinos abroad to save and offers them information on investing and managing their assets. These two will be part of our discussion tonight. With that, let me welcome Mr. Villanueva to the Chairman's Report. Lito, thanks for making time.
Chairman Kling.
So, I think when people talk about migrants abroad, the first thing that comes to mind is remittances. But with so many things happening domestically, internationally, maybe let's begin with your outlook. What's your outlook for the remittances this year?
You know, our outlook has always been very positive. With the growing number of Filipinos overseas, I mean, the growing volume of inward remittance into the Philippines, and in fact, we are still the third amongst the top three amongst countries insofar as inward remittance volume is concerned. And definitely, the good thing with our partnership, with our collaboration with the Commission on Filipinos Overseas, pertaining to scaling inclusive digital finance and having to provide financial education, especially for most Filipinos who are working or living overseas. They still lack that access to responsive and responsible banking or financing. So that's why this collaboration that we have with you is really pivotal insofar as having to really empower and enable more Filipinos have that competency and responsibility when it comes to having that access. So that's why I think for RCBC, we are one of the primary movers insofar as having to promote the welfare of our Filipinos overseas by way of providing digital access to banking services. So that's why I think this programs like this has to be supported, given the fact that this really provides so much information and awareness amongst our Filipinos overseas.
Right. There are a number of things going on, right? Particularly in the United States. I don't know, by the time they watch this program, we don't know what's going to happen to that big, beautiful bill of the U.S. President Donald Trump. Are you looking at that? Are there any concerns? Of course, that's their decision to make. But what would be the implications? What are some of the concerns? I hear that, for example, there may be a tariff or a 5% tax on remittances, not just the Philippines, but overall coming from the United States.
Well, apparently for non-Americans, so non-U.S. citizens, apparently the excise tax is around 3.5% based on the big beautiful bill that was passed by the U.S. House of Representatives. But you still need the Senate for its concurrence. And apparently, there are still a lot of discussions pertaining to having to reconcile the bill, right? And apparently, the U.S. Senate has quite a number of issues pertaining to that. And I think that will still be a long way insofar as having to have that discussion. But offhand, I think one of the things that we also need to consider is that, if ever that will be in effect, I mean, if this big beautiful bill would have that component of having to provide an excise tax or having to charge an excise tax of about 3.5% for remittances, say to Philippines, that would be additional burden for our overseas Filipinos because 1 peso counts, no? So in terms of having to provide, good future for their relatives back home, no, in the Philippines. So I think that's why part of the G7, initiative, as well as World Bank, for example, and even IFC, is really having to look into ways on how we could further reduce the friction in terms of reducing the cost of sending money and having to provide the trust, the reliability, the efficiency and security in having to send money back to the Philippines. So that's why one of the things that we are also pushing, at least for RCBC, is really having to come up with ways on how we can leverage digital for remittances with the end in view of having to reduce the cost of sending money, of having to have the transparency, security, and of course efficiency, no? and of course speed, no? By way of having to send that in a matter of practically real-time sending of money to their loved ones. And practically, one of the things that we're looking into is having to provide that enablement or empowerment for Filipinos overseas to take full control of their finances instead of them having to send money in bulk, for example, because the normal way of, the practice or the habit of most Filipinos would always be, say, every payday they would send, say, $200 or $500, and then they will now give the instructions to their loved ones, or this amount goes to the amortization, this amount goes to the payment of tuition, etc. But in this particular initiative of going digital, the empowerment of the full control as regards their finances will now be with the Filipino the sender, no, the overseas Filipino, instead of them having to entrust the whole amount to their loved ones in the Philippines, and most often than not,
or maybe divert it to something else.
Yung mga squander, diba? So and I think sometimes in some cases, some of those supposed funds that are supposed to be payment for amortization, normally nga squandered, hindi na nababayad. So by the time that they go back to Philippines, they'll be surprised that he was expecting that the new house and lot or new condo unit has already been fully paid. No, apparently hindi nabayaran or something. So in this particular case, we're now giving that power, that enablement now back to the overseas Filipinos.
Well, what's your sense? Because there's so many things, as I said, going on globally, and they're talking about the possible recession in the U.S. And when the U.S. goes into recession, the whole world is affected. And the implication there is that some Filipinos might lose their job, or maybe they will, at best, may not get the increase that they normally get. Do you think the level of remittance which has sustained the Philippines to the tune of like 10% of GDP for over decades, is that something you think will continue, or have we plateaued, or are we to expect even bigger things or less things in the future? What's the the long-term view there?
My take there is that for the longest time, the Philippines has excellent economic fundamentals, no?
Yeah.
And we've been through a lot in terms of going through a lot of ups and downs. And I think one sterling quality of Filipinos would be the resiliency, no?
Sure.
And we've been through, as I've said, we've been through a lot of crises, man-made and even natural calamities. And yet we're still standing, and we're still, practically we're so used to having to, encounter lots of challenges. And I think that quality has been there for the longest time. And I think that, that 10% share of, GDP, in terms of representation of insofar as the inward remittance volume is concerned, has been there for quite a while.
Sure.
And at the same time, the number, as I've said, the number of Filipinos being sent overseas is still growing up to this time. So that's why I think the mandate or the things that you are doing, like the Commission on Filipinos Overseas, together with the Department of Migrant Workers, are really excellent examples of how we can take care of our Filipinos overseas. Because I think for the longest time as well, we've been saying that we have over 12 million Filipinos overseas. Mukhang na-stuck tayo doon for the longest time, for 10 years.
I've heard about 10.7, 10.8,
yeah,
but that's been the number for a long time.
For a long time. And our population has been growing, and yet the number of the overseas Filipinos now would still be at 10 or 11 million, 12 million. I think there should be more than 10 or 12 million out there, right? So, but I think these are some programs that we are initiating together with the government sector, and there should be more like-minded institutions, organizations that should also come up with programs that would be geared towards having to provide more enablement or empowerment to our Filipinos overseas.
Yeah, well, that's reassuring that also that you're positive. But let me switch angles a bit. But one of the things that we've been looking at, the CFO, was maybe attributing the remittances to the right group. I mean, obviously, we appreciate what's going on with the OFWs, but when you talk about the total universe, the 10.8 or 12 million that you're talking about, Filipinos overseas, only 20-30% of that are actually workers. So the 70-80% are Filipinos living abroad permanently, which I don't think receive enough credit for the remittances that they also send home to the Philippines. Can you talk a little bit about maybe why it's difficult to determine whether it's coming from an OFW or from a green card holder, and then maybe is it also from what you know from RCBC? Is it also correct, for instance, to thank maybe the permanent migrants abroad and not just the OFWs for the 10% of the GDP equivalent of remittances sent?
Actually, you're right. I mean, if you are to look at, the Filipinos in general, regardless whether they are working overseas or now living in some parts of the world, and especially those in North America, both in the US and Canada, they would still be sending money back home, right? Because they still have relatives here. And surprisingly, there was a survey conducted amongst Filipinos living in the US. They said that I think more than 30%, in fact 31% of Filipinos living in the US would still want to go back to Philippines, or would still want to retire, or practically just go back to Philippines.
Right.
So that's why, if I may share with you, about 3 weeks ago, we had this initiative that where we launched what we call Bahay, BHAI, actually, because this is an AI-enabled home matching capability or platform that would now allow initially Filipinos living in the US to select or look for potential, condo or home properties in the Philippines, and be able to finance that through RCBC. And in fact, funny because there's also that paradox wherein we had news where about more than 8,000 condo units. We have a surplus of condo units in the Philippines, yet there is so much demand from overseas Filipinos who would want to invest in properties in the Philippines. So in this particular case, we are now enabling that capability through AI, and this will now be boodle-free, or this will be scam-free, because it has geo mapping, geolocation, making sure that we only deal with legitimate developers, who would be uploading the inventory that they have, and would now be shown to all the Filipinos living in the US, and they could now compute as regards to their ability to pay for their monthly amortization, and as to when it could be transferred to them or ready for occupancy, etc. So these are some of the tools or some of the initiatives that we are doing to provide that capabilities to our Filipinos overseas.
Well, I want to ask you more about that, but just very quickly before we go on break, when RCBC and other financial institutions go to the U.S. or anywhere abroad to encourage them to maybe use your facility or use your products to remit, is it correct that you also target permanent migrants? And then in your experience, should they be equally appreciated as the OFW modern day heroes for giving back?
Definitely. Any Filipino...
so they don't turn their back on the Philippines?
Definitely. So for as long as you are a Filipino citizen, you must be given that service.
All right. Well, Lito, very interesting. We'll have to take a quick break. This is 𝐷𝐂𝐚𝐢𝐫𝐦𝐚. You're watching the Chairman's Report. We'll be right back with Lito Villanueva of RCBC.
Gisingin na at salubungin ang umagang puno ng kaalamang pangkalusugan. Hindi na kayo mag-worry dahil ang inyong concerns ay sagot na ng ating mga bisitang doktor at espesyalista. Matuto kasama nina Doc Cel Martinez at Jerome Sang sa Doc Ruba tuwing Sabado alas 8 ng umaga dito sa IBC 13. Kulang ang araw mo kung wala ang kids na hindi lang cute at charming, kundi super talented din.
It's a time for the people of Iloilo to show their love for their faith and celebrate a rich culture. Young shows the world how rich and diverse Filipino culture is.
Panoorin sila sa Talents Academy every Saturday at 4:30 p.m. sa IBC 13.
Welcome back to the Chairman's Report. I'm 𝐷𝐂𝐚𝐢𝐫𝐦𝐚. We're talking to Lito Villanueva of RCBC. Lito, the Filipinos overseas, many are deployed as professionals, but also there are other categories of workers. Do they need financial literacy? What's your experience in this area?
Definitely. You'll be surprised that even the professionals or supposedly educated individuals would also succumb to these scams, right? Because especially with the advent of AI, deepfakes, etc., it will be very difficult for anyone to really distinguish which is real and which is fake, right? And of course, with the proliferation of social media, you have TikTok, you have Facebook, etc., and you could fake your image, you could fake your voice, you could fake, and in fact, a lot of leading personalities, or famous personalities, are being mimicked or would have fake, deepfake versions of themselves, and these are being proliferated by scammers, right, worldwide, right. In fact, going here into the studio, I just saw a, 𝐻𝐢𝐿𝐵 Ayala deepfake, version,
wow.
Trying to sell to the public, investment, right? So which is practically a scam, right? So.
Yeah.
But you will definitely see the actual video, and without you having to, for example, for most Filipinos, they never had an personal encounter with, say, Jazza, for example. But when they saw it on video, it is as if it is really genuine, and you will definitely believe it.
Yeah.
In fact, when I check the message, the messages, or from the netizens, practically 95% of those who said who commented on that particular video was practically, I want to invest in this particular program, blah blah. So practically more than 90% of them believe that it is actually a genuine, legitimate investment program, right? So imagine that is just one personality, and you have even other international or celebrities who would have their deepfake versions, and the public would be scammed by way of having to really invest on that. So the thing here is that even the good thing is that our SEC, Securities Exchange Commission, has been very active or hyperactive when it comes to providing that literacy program and having to provide alerts or campaigns. And in fact, even for FinTech Alliance, 2 years ago we came up with what we call hashtag wag magpaloko maging scam alerto industry-led cybersecurity awareness campaign. Because again, to your question, even those professionals or even those who are, educated ones,
They fall victim to it.
yeah, they could easily be duped into believing that this is a legitimate one. And of course, especially, I think you've experienced this as well, receiving lots of SMS.
Sure.
Congratulations, you have been accepted to your to a new job.
Right.
Please click this link, or you just won 1 million. You just click this link to claim your prize. Those things like get rich quick schemes, you have to be doubtful already. But unfortunately for some Filipinos, they would believe that, right? So because nakuha ko yung text, meron akong 1 million, click ko yung link. And in fact, that is already account takeover.
Right.
And that's why in the scheme of things, in the ecosystem of digital finance, really the customers, our consumers, would really have to have that education or literacy component for them to really protect themselves, right?
Sure.
Without you having to share your OTPs, for example, or sharing your bank account, bank details, etc. Because your OTP or one-time password or your mobile key is practically your house key, or your key to your property or to your belongings. So you don't normally just give it to someone na hindi mo kilala, right? So that's why you really have to make sure that, especially for some Filipinos, I think I saw an article wherein amongst the countries in the world, the Philippines would have the most number of users when it comes to social media, but the most susceptible naman when it comes to all of these scams, right? Because if you notice, in Facebook alone, for example, there are quite a number of citizens, for example, who got their passport renewal or new passport. They will take a photo of their passport. They will post it in Facebook. I just got my passport today, etc. Nakalagay lahat doon yung pangalan, yung date of birth na, etc. I mean, these are the things that, because of your willingness to, to share stories about yourself, you are practically sharing your personal data. So that's why you have to make sure, and also, if I may also advise our audience, anything that you put in your social media stays there forever.
Right.
So you can no longer, recall that image or that statement or that whatever or whatever photo. Especially, for example, for most Filipinos now and practically across the world, the massive usage of ChatGPT, for example. Say if you are working in your organization or any confidential information, etc. Once you upload any image or any document in ChatGPT, for example, you say a prompt to ChatGPT, please summarize this. But in fact, that document is supposedly a confidential document or whatever document.
It stays in the web.
In the web.
You talked about the RCBC program that you'll launch later this year on the 𝐕𝐢𝐺. Is that born out of also maybe a need among Filipinos overseas and OFWs to look for investment opportunities here from a reliable source?
Precisely.
What some of the horror stories that you've heard?
In fact, when we launched this program together with you, with CFO, together with Department of Migrant Workers and the Department of Trade and Industry, in fact, Secretary Hans 𝐶𝐸𝐺 even shared some horror stories. Like, for example, they are overseas Filipinos who would be religiously paying for their monthly amortization, so sending money to their loved ones, or you have with the instructions of, okay, you have to for this amount you have to pay the monthly amortization, etc. So then after say 5 years or 7 years working overseas, then he goes back to Philippines, and then only to find out that nasa yung bahay, wala yung bahay, no? It's either yung pre-selling hindi non-existent siya,
right,
or the loved one or the spouse or whoever in the Philippines never paid those amortizations, right? So that's why part of this initiative is really making sure that we provide all the information and we protect the consumer. That's why consumer protection is really vital in having to push for what we call trust, right? Because for Filipinos or for consumers to adopt or embrace digital, the basic component there is trust. I have an acronym for trust nga, technology that is responsive, universal, secure, and transparent. So this thing, regardless of the player in the industry, if there's one thing that we are sharing data insofar as amongst all the players in the industry, would be about cyber crime, right? And having to make sure that all players in the industry would really take it to heart on how sacred the word trust is. So to make sure that our consumers, the Filipinos in general, would embrace going digital.
Right. So, what are the other ways that you're trying to ensure, as you said earlier, maybe use your word, empower the sender? You're talking about maybe offering other products, right? What are some of the other things in the pipeline besides bahay?
Yeah, what the good idea that came from DTI Secretary Chris Roque was, aside from the consumer lending, which is home provisioning, for example, or home loans for overseas Filipinos, is also the opportunity for them to have businesses in the Philippines.
Okay.
So there could also
be more entrepreneurial rather than...
In fact, we will have a partnership with the Philippine Franchising Association, in partnership with the Department of Trade and Industry, on how they can also choose amongst potential business opportunities, because going into business is one thing, but knowing how to run the business is another thing.
Sure. Or maybe vetting your potential partners.
Precisely. Because one of the, again, education component is key in making sure that you educate also the overseas Filipino on how to run the business, right? So, because you don't, because you have to make sure that that becomes now a sustainable livelihood for them. So say, for example, there could be potential business loan or personal loan that could be for a kiosk business, for example. But making sure that it's not just the overseas Filipino who knows how to run the business, but also ensuring that the training has to be attended by their loved ones in the Philippines who will also in a way run the business while in the country.
Yeah, and that goes to the point I want to ask next. And again, we have to take a quick break after this. But why do you think there's so much need for financial literacy, not just for overseas Filipinos, but even for people here? Is it because there's something that needs to be added to our educational system, or are we simply trying to get used to this new world, as you said, with so many social media posts and offerings that even the richest people in the Philippines get used or get scammed? What needs to be done?
I really love this topic because, again, it takes two to tango. Because the financial education or financial literacy is not only confined with the overseas Filipino.
Right. It's for everyone.
It has to be also, we also need to train or educate their families in the Philippines.
Sure.
Because the mindset has always been, okay, I will just, anyway, monthly I would expect a remittance from my husband or from my wife or from my mother or from my whoever. And that's it, right? So there must be that training or that education on entrepreneurship amongst the family members in the Philippines, right? Because they need to understand that every peso or every dollar that their loved ones would earn from overseas is practically born out of hard work, sacrifice,
blood and sweat.
And I mean that every peso counts, right?
Yeah.
So every peso that is being sent back to Philippines counts. So that's why I think they need to also appreciate, and how they also need to be empowered and enabled on how to make use of this limited funds or limited resource, and practically, invest that in a or
In a
come up
productive
with
way,
some businesses, etc. And of course, having to educate them along the way.
Well, that's very interesting. We'll have to take a quick break, Lito. We'll be right back. You're watching the Chairman's Report. Please stay tuned.
Gusto nyo ba ng mas exciting na content? It's time to manually scan your Digibox or Smart TV. Tune in sa aming dynamic trio lineup, all in one channel band. Stay tuned to Congress TV at channel 13.2 for the latest updates and happenings straight from the legislative halls. Enjoy your favorite shows na hindi lang siksik sa information, kundi punong-puno rin sa entertainment sa IBC 13 at channel 13.1. At para sa pinakabagong balita, talk shows at music, stay tuned to the 1206 AM sa channel 13.3, broadcasting your favorite radio shows on your TV. All this and more in just one channel band. Don't miss out. Manually scan your Digibox or Smart TV now to enjoy Congress TV at 13.2, IBC 13 at 13.1, at the 1206 AM at 13.3. Experience more. Enjoy more. Only on your TV.
Travel goals? Hindi papahuli dyan si Diego.
Look at that. We're gonna be hanging loose. Kaya swak ito para sa quick nature trip.
Samahan siya sa kanyang adventurous trip habang tinutuklas ang bawat sulok ng Pilipinas at ang natatanging culture, cuisine, and everything in between. Sa Kultura, tuwing Sabado alas 11 ng umaga dito sa IBC 13.
Welcome back to the Chairman's Report. I'm 𝐂𝐡𝐚𝐢𝐫𝐬. We're talking to Lito Villanueva of RCBC. Very interesting discussion on savings and the scams. But can we go now to some practical tips, from your viewpoint? I mean, I hear a lot of people asking that, they understand the need to save. They just don't know how to. Maybe just to put it in a question format, how much should you put away? I mean, I've heard something as little as 10%, but other people say that you should put away at least 6 months or up to a year's worth of your household expenses. But what are some of the advice that you give?
Yeah, so I think a lot of programs or discussions have been about financial education, financial inclusion. And to your question, I mean, the question as to do we set aside 10%, 20% of our income, etc., especially in having to create your emergency fund, right? So saying that it has to be at least 6 months equivalent of your pay,
expenses,
your expenses, for you to be able to safely say na I'm okay, right?
Right.
So, but I think if we are to talk about really financial inclusion, it's not just about savings, right? I call it. I would define financial inclusion in one word, but with 5 pillars. I call it PISIL. Alam PISIL, no?
Yeah.
PISIL, because PISIL would be payments, investments, savings, insurance, and loans or lending. So this would be the 5 components of financial inclusion. And financial inclusion is, as I've said, is not just focused on savings or payments, right? So, say for example, start mo tayo sa P, payments. So, of course, one of the things that we are pushing has always been how to make use of digital for payments, digital payments. And even at the height of COVID, we've seen the exponential growth of PesoNet, InstaPay, or transfers via smartphones or mobile
Digital
apps,
wallets, yeah.
digital wallets, and digital bank accounts. And we've seen also the sustained growth even post-COVID-19. So I think if there's that silver lining of COVID-19, I think that's really the massive awareness of Filipinos and having to embrace the value and relevance of going digital, right? So, and then the next one is on insurance, making sure, sadly, still a single-digit penetration
Filipinos
rate.
are not very much.
Yeah, they're not so much into insurance because
bahala na.
Oo, di ba sabi nga nila parang this is something sold not bought eh.
Yeah.
Because for them, for Filipinos, ayoko mag-insurance, baka mamaya may premonition, mamamatay na ako or something like that.
Yeah.
Or I can only get the benefit pag namatay na ako. That's the whole idea of it.
Yeah.
Making sure that your loved ones
Yeah.
will also benefit from that insurance. No? Parang hindi sila mabibigla o magugulat sa in any eventualities. Right? So next one, in fact, the insurance, it's not just about your personal insurance, but also having to insure your businesses, right? So, and as I've said, sadly, because you still have quite an very low appreciation amongst Filipinos as to the relevance of insurance. But good thing, we've seen a number of insurtech in the country now that would now provide digital enabled way of securing your non-life insurance or even life insurance products. Now, savings on the next one is savings on how to now you have quite a number of ways to easily open bank accounts. For example, in our case, we have this CarTech. We have one valid ID, and that's it. In real time, you create a CarTech basic deposit account, and once you create a CarTech basic deposit account, you earn 4.88% annual interest on your savings. So we actually encourage more Filipinos to save and enjoy these benefits, no? And the next one is investment. In fact, a good thing we have this partnership with the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. They have the PERA program, which is the personal equity and retirement account.
Yes.
This is more about...
This is like the 401k equivalent of the Philippines.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is the wealth building tool that would now encourage Filipinos overseas and even Filipinos here living in the country to really save up, no? And again, we are enabling that in terms of providing that wealth building tools via digital format, no? And there are quite a number of banks and wallets that are now into this in partnership with BSP. And then the last one is lending or loans. So again, we are providing that particular services through digital means so that 24/7 you could now easily avail of loans, for example. And in fact, a lot of Filipinos are still classified as new to credit. So without them having no credit score, for example.
Right.
So
no credit history.
No credit history. That's why most of them would be victims of predatory lenders or yung mga 5-6, no?
Right.
So that's why we're also educating them on how to build their own credit profile or credit score so that they could now borrow funds from reputable institutions so that they can enjoy lower interest rates at a higher, longer term. No? So that's why, in fact, when we launched our digital lending initiative for unsecured lending, in a matter of 1 year, the share of digital channel for our unsecured lending has been a staggering 64%. So it means that there's so much interest amongst Filipinos insofar as having to access these facilities. And in fact, our the delinquency rate is very low at around 2%. So again, that is the power of AI, the power of data, of making sure that you can really score them, leveraging technology to make use of to practically provide more efficiencies in the process.
That's very interesting. But let me ask something a little bit more basic. When people talk about serving the unbanked in the Philippines. Are there also members of the overseas Filipino community who are also unbanked? Because I remember when I go abroad, nurses, for instance, because they don't have credit history, as you said, they transact everything in cash. They buy a house in cash, they buy cars in cash, maybe because they can't afford to, well, they're denied when they apply for credit. But what's your experience? Do those problems exist abroad as well?
Okay, terminologies. Okay,
Yeah.
so you have what we call unbanked and underserved.
Okay.
For most Filipinos overseas, they are classified as underserved.
I see.
Because they have bank accounts, because
Okay.
they have, they
Their
receive
payroll
their,
account, yeah.
they have received their pay or their salaries through a bank account, etc.
Okay.
But as regards them having to use other banking services or enjoying those facilities, it's not there. It's not present, right?
Right.
So that's why they could be classified as underserved rather than unbanked.
I see.
But there are also overseas Filipinos who are also unbanked. I mean, practically, they are being paid in cash by their employers.
Right, right.
And that's it, right? So that's why, but I would say if we are to classify OFWs or Filipinos overseas, majority of them would be classified as underserved.
Yeah, but I guess the point I'm trying to make is, does RCBC have something for them? I mean, I can imagine if you're a plumber in the States, for instance, you probably get paid cash because they,
Yes.
So does RCBC have something for those types of Filipinos working abroad, doing, blue collar work?
Definitely. I mean, in fact, in a McKinsey study,
Okay.
it shows that more than 70% of Filipinos overseas do not have access to formal credit.
That's interesting.
Yet, they are the ones receiving high pay,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
So that's actually the anomaly, I would
Yeah.
say, because they are not seen by the banks, by the
Right.
financial institutions, because
Right.
of the absence of formal credit,
Right.
or as I've said, they are what we call the new to credit. No?
Right, the new
So
to credit.
that's why thanks to digital, once we could now see your credit footprint or your
Yeah.
digital footprint, then the algorithm could now kick in, wherein we could now see we could profile you as someone who is eligible for a loan, eligible for whatever service that you deserve, and these are and again, it boils down to data, as I've said, and making sure that the data that you have would be quality data that you could now make use of to make sure that you can also provide the what we call the hyper-personalized service to a particular individual.
I see. So what do they do? Do they go to the RCBC website, or
Yes,
what's
yeah.
the advice?
No, they can download RCBC Pulse app, and they can.
there's an app. Okay,
there's an
mobile
app,
app.
RCBC
Okay.
Pulse app. In fact, we're actually the first or one of the first financial institutions in the Philippines that allowed Filipinos overseas to open a bank account through RCBC Pulse app using their foreign issued mobile number with their passport. As part of the requirement for a valid ID when you open a bank account. So far, from the time that we launched this overseas, we now have thousands of Filipinos working and living across the world from about 85 countries.
Wow.
So we have
No wonder
Pulse
you've been
users.
traveling all the time.
We have Pulse users or app users who are stationed in more than 80 countries worldwide.
Wow. Very interesting. Lito, we'll just have to take another quick break. We'll be right back with the Chairman's Report. I'm 𝐸𝐸𝐿𝐸, and please stay with us.
Kasama si Greg Gregorio. Sama-sama nating alamin at tuklasin ang mga tungkuling ginagampanan ng bawat miyembro ng gabinete at ni Pangulong Ferdinand Marcos Jr. para sa pagbabago at kaunlaran ng ating bansa. Sa Cabinet at Work, tuwing Lunes, 1:30 ng hapon, dito sa IBC 13.
Welcome Welcome back to the Chairman's Report. We're talking to Lito Villanueva, RCBC. Lito, we're talking about savings, but the other component of that is investments. Now, you were talking a while ago about this new program that you'll be launching later this year, the 𝐕𝐢𝐿. Does that imply that real estate is a good investment in the Philippines? And maybe you should add to that. Where else should I park our money?
You're right. I mean, I think that is also a known fact for amongst Filipinos that they really cherish to have their own homes, right? And that aspiration has been there for the longest time. And even those Filipinos leaving the country, if you are to ask them, in fact, I did my own FGD and mini survey whenever I'm overseas. I would even ask, sometimes I would visit them, etc. And I would ask that main question, what's your aspiration? Anong gusto mo? Why did you leave the country? I mean, why are you working
to buy
here?
your own house, yeah.
The first reply or the first response would always be, ay gusto ko magkabahay, sariling bahay. I mean, that has always been the primary aspiration amongst Filipinos because for them, having to have their own home would be their prized possession or their trophy of their, to mark the success of their, of their work, of their life, right? But the thing is that you need now to provide them with capabilities or enablement on how they can actually achieve that aspiration, right? So again, in part of that is really education, and part of that is really providing them with the facility to really, for them to realize that aspiration. And I think with this 𝐕𝐢𝐿 initiative that we have in partnership with Talino Ventures, is something that we can really say that we are listening to the plight of our fellow Filipinos. And really, as I've said, I've been saying this in most of my speaking engagements. I would always say that it is, there's no value of having the sexiest app, for example, or the most robust platform or service if it doesn't address main pain points or the pain points of your target market, right? So at the end of the day, the best thing really is on how you could be customer obsessed, making sure that at your core is having to respond to how you can provide or deliver a delightful customer experience, and having to really address that friction, and making sure that you can provide that awesome, as I've said, awesome CX or awesome customer experience. Because the ultimate measure of success is that for any initiative that you have is having to have customers who are making use or who are patronizing your services, right? And as I've said, there is no such thing as a perfect product. You iterate along the way, and you always listen to your customers on how you could further improve your offering or your service. Because again, going back to your question, ensuring that if having to invest on a house and lot or a condo would be the only way for them to really invest, right? There are quite a number of investment, ideas, right? So having to invest in a business, having to invest in your real estate property, and having to invest on a lot of or stocks, for example, or capital markets. And I think that's one thing that BSP has been pushing, led by BSP Governor Eli Remolona, and he has been telling us, the industry, of having to really promote the capital markets, right? And having to further expand the capital markets in the Philippines, because I think those are some of the things that we can really tell our overseas Filipinos. And I think for most of them, they're not even aware of capital markets. They're not even aware of PERA, for example, the personal equity and retirement account.
No, I'll tell you, some of the branches of banks are not even aware. I mean, it's something I looked into.
Yeah.
Sometimes they don't have enough information. They refer you to the main office, for example. That's been a personal experience of mine.
True. Sadly, yes. It really happens. Even for some bank personnel, they're not even aware of some of their products.
I had to explain what that is to the banker, which is quite funny. But when you buy a home, right, and you live in it, there's no return. I guess if you want to earn a return, do you buy multiple property now? The question is that a better investment? And you talked about equities. Should I put it in equities instead? You talked about your potential partnership with the franchising association. Is franchising, does it offer a higher return? Or should I look at all of these and maybe diversify my investments. What are some of the
That's why
general recommendations?
That's why a number of multimedia personalities, for example, or even those what we call the content creators, are also trying to push for or promote the active income or the passive income, right? So to your point, having to buy your house and lot or your condo, that is not income generating, because you can transform that into an income generating
when you rent it out,
vehicle where you could just maybe Airbnb, for example, or have it rented out, etc. At least instead of you at least the amortization that you're paying to the developer would be coming from the rentals, rental income from that particular unit, right? So that is actually a good thing for overseas Filipinos, because that is also a passive income, and while you are trying to provide or to pay off that amortization, those amounts are practically generated from the rental payments from that particular unit. And of course businesses, right? But making sure that you have that awareness and also the right training on how to run the business, because you don't want a failed business initiative, right? So because that is also a huge investment on their part. I mean, aside from the money, it's also the time, right? So, but again, as I've said, the training doesn't have to be just solely confined within the overseas Filipino workers, but the training has to also involve the family members in the Philippines, because the running of the business is not to be done by the overseas Filipinos because he's working overseas, right? But the ones running the show is practically the family members in the Philippines. So they also have to be trained as regards running the business.
You talked about capital markets. Does RCBC have, you mentioned an app a while ago. Do you have any offerings that maybe help people to invest in equities?
Yes,
something?
Yeah, in our RCBC Pulse app, we have UITF.
Okay.
And in fact, we are the first bank in the Philippines that introduced the digital 𝐸MA, investment management account.
Okay.
In fact, by third quarter of this year, we are also launching the PERA initiative of BSP inside the RCBC Pulse app. So we have quite a number of digital investments initiatives that will now be inside the RCBC Pulse app.
And then you said the franchising. Is that something that will be rolled out soon, or will there be an educational component to that? Because some people might find investing in franchising easier, but if they don't go in with the full information, they may ruin it somehow. There's always a risk when you go into
True.
business.
In fact, we will be running a Negosyantec series, wherein we will invite MSMEs, in the RCBC office, because we have a town hall there, where we will now also have speakers or experts who are into the MSME sector. And this would be in partnership with the likes of former DTI Secretary Mon Lopez, Noel Winicky, the 𝐂𝐤𝐴 for MSMEs, for entrepreneurs. So, but the whole idea is on how we capacitize them and have the knowledge about having to go into business, and really telling them, this is not really a bed of roses, right? So you have to make sure that you are, you need to devote time, resources, etc. And this is not, and you really have to make sure that you know how to run a business, right? So as simple as having to, to account for all of your inventories and having to have your sales report, etc.
You mentioned passive income a while ago. People are fascinated by that. What comes to mind when you recommend investments to people? What kind of passive income opportunity should they be looking at? You mentioned rentals a while ago, but are there any other things that? They are accredited or licensed or registered investment officers, who can practically provide you advices, right? So that's why it's very critical that even before you come, you go into something, right? So you make sure that you're talking to the right, to a licensed or registered investment officers. Don't
right?
talk to your neighbor.
Don't talk to your neighbor. Talk to legitimate registered experts, right? Especially you have to deal with banks, for example. And the thing here is that part of that is making sure that, again, even before you shell out money or whatever, or make sure that you have the comprehensive understanding of the risks, right? And as I've said, you have to make sure that you can really that the investment officer who will be talking to you, for example, the licensed one, the registered ones, should be able to provide you with that, with that profiling or that risk, the risk that are attendant to a particular investment, right? So you have to make sure that you're talking to the right individuals.
So I think it's a very important advice.
Yeah.
Don't talk to just anyone. Talk to an expert.
Or don't talk to the social media. Or
Right.
Yeah.
Lito, we can talk on and on about growing and preserving your wealth, but this is about the time we have. Maybe before we go, you would like to leave a message?
Yes. Again, thank you so much, Secretary Klink, for this opportunity. And I think just to give some insights, some advices to our viewers out there, especially those who are living overseas or working overseas, I just would like to share with you some of these initiatives that we have. In fact, we have quite a number of initiatives or programs that we currently have, and of course those things that we will be launching very soon, which we earlier discussed. And I think one of the things that I also would like to promote here is, in fact, for FinTech Alliance, we have the Manila Tech Summit happening August 26 to 27. And that is a very interesting topic that we will be discussing. And of course, Secretary Klink will also be part of that program. And of course, the Bagong Pilipinas, the Philippines Country Pavilion that will be at the Singapore FinTech Festival this November. So these are some of the things that we are preparing, that we are set to launch very soon. And of course, for RCBC, we have a number of initiatives that are really geared towards servicing and empowering our fellow Filipinos. Maraming pong salamat.
Well, thanks, Lito. That's a lot to look forward to. This has been this week's Chairman's Report. I'm Dante Klink-𝐤𝐤. Please keep on watching IBC 13. I'll see you next week.